we are not alone.
These are supposed to be some of the most verified images of giants.
People who do meditation for 60 days will lengthen their telomeres.
Soon we'll get results, and we'll let you know right here on Beyond Belief.
Things seem to be changing in the field of ufology.
It's going to be a bumpy ride.
That's priceless.
Isn't that amazing?
Tesla wanted free energy, and look what happened to him.
Plenty of evidence to show that they're real. The real question is how and why.
There were Egyptian hieroglyphs out in the outback of Australia.
In Australia. What are the possibilities? Mars was inhabited, and these were built.
We almost can't duplicate today. These are amazing topics.
What if there was something like at Area 51 deep underwater?
They were killed by some animal.
Believe me, we're just getting started. I'm George Norrie, and we here at Gaia are committed to revealing the truth.
In a second, Richard C. Hoagland back with us. The Other Side of Midnight. Wait till you hear what he's got to say next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Richard C. Hoagland back with us, principal investigator and founder of the Enterprise mission, as well as the vision and voice of The Other Side of Midnight. He is the recipient of the Engstrom Medal and the former science advisor to CBS News and Walter Cronkite. Together with Carl Sagan, Richard co-created the Pioneer Plaque and predicted life on Europa in his groundbreaking paper, The Europa Proposal. Now, that was published 37 years before NASA's announcement. His vision has inspired an entirely new generation of pioneers of thought and form and opened the way for citizen scientists around the globe. He's also an author of several books, including Dark Mission and The Monuments of Mars. Here he is back on Coast to Coast, Richard C. Hoagland. Mr. Hoagland, how are you?
George, good evening, good morning, wherever we are.
I was close to you. I was in Sedona. You're still in New Mexico, right?
Yeah, I'm north of Albuquerque.
How have you been?
Working hard. We've got some astonishing stuff to talk about tonight. And Lex has done double duty, and he's got my images up there, so we have an incredible set of things to talk about with the audience.
Great things indeed. And I will always remember you in the beginning of my days as the guy who talked about Cydonia and the face on Mars.
Yeah, it's really weird how when you do anything in media, you get typecast. and for decades, I've been known as, that Mars guy, the crazy guy who thinks there's a face on Mars or there was an ancient civilization. Well, tonight, we're going to go, like 100 times better, because what I'm going to announce on your show for the first time nationally is the fact that we've got governmental confirmation from the South Korean unmanned mission heading to the moon from last August, arrived last December, is now firmly in orbit, and is taking stunning images with a special onboard camera and posting them on their own official government South Korean Space Agency website, which confirm my assertion for decades that the moon is covered with ancient artificial structures all over the moon.
And the late Ingo Swann, the remote viewer, claims that he saw on the backside in his remote viewing structures and crazy things like that, too.
Well, it's backside, front side, upside, downside. It's all over the surface. And if we want to go to the images, given that we were able to put up about a handful tonight, and there'll be so many more on the Other Side of Midnight website for the show this coming Saturday night, when I and my colleagues are going to kind of go through where we are with all this evidence. And we have this section of the Other Side of Midnight called Radio with Pictures, so we post all the images so people can look at them, they can listen to us, and it's all at the othersideofmidnight.com website, and the show is at 9 o'clock Pacific on Saturday night.
Good for you.
Coming Saturday night.
I have heard rumors that the CIA may have dropped some info on you. Is that true?
Yes.
What happened? Tell me about this.
I mean, look, this all started for me. Remember, the Mars thing went for like almost 2 decades, and we had impossible problems getting any new data out of NASA, until the Mars Surveyor went back 20 years after Viking. So I started looking at other implications of what would be true in our own history and in the solar system if there were, in fact, smashingly large artificial structures on Mars at a place called Cydonia featuring a humanoid face. And one of the implications of that, if we were not looking at a culture on Mars strictly independently evolved, originated and evolved, having nothing to do with Earth, which was incredibly improbable. If the face was an indication of some connection between Mars and Earth, then what would limit that connection between Mars and the Moon, or Mars and Jupiter, or Mars and Saturn, or Mars and Mercury? In other words, was there an ancient solar system-wide influence which had left artifacts not only on Mars, but also elsewhere in the solar system, potentially even including our own moon? And it was in 1994 when I and Cynthia and a bunch of other people that I got together were all invited to Cody, Wyoming, to something called the 1994 Cody, Wyoming Mars Conference. And unbeknownst to the backers, who it turned out later were CIA, I had prepared a secret presentation to debut my completely separate work on the moon, on potential artifacts in NASA data and other nations' data from the moon compared to Mars.
29 years ago.
Yeah, and I hadn't told anybody I was doing this, and I debuted my work at this conference, and for it I earned a trip to the back room and an incredibly severe, almost life-threatening, scolding from the presenters behind the scenes who'd put the conference on, who were stunned that I was looking at the moon and not at Mars, where, of course, all the disinformation stories discrediting the Viking data, tricks of light and shadow and all that have been out there for years. But they had no defense against the moon because they didn't know anybody was looking until I debuted what I was doing at this conference in 1994. And Cynthia, among others, was there to see the you-know-what hit the rotating kitchen appliance.
And who at the CIA was getting to you?
Well, there was a folks. Look, most of the intelligence community, for some reason, when they retire with very, very good pensions, they pick Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, that area to settle in. So Cody, Wyoming is like a hotbed of retired, there are no such things as retired CIA officers. And they, it turned out, were the ones that put on this conference, obviously to draw out what we knew about Mars. And when I, kind of sprung the moon on them, and the stuff that I had taken from the NASA and other archives that's there, it completely bollocksed up their game plan.
It sure did. We have some images that Richard sent over to Lex in the highlight reel at coasttocoastam.com. We'll talk about that a little bit later on tonight on Coast to Coast. So what has been the official CIA evidence of the ancient lunar ruins?
Well, in 1959, when President Eisenhower proposed to the Russians, to Chairman Khrushchev, that we adopt as two nations bristling with nuclear weapons an open skies policy, that we would fly reconnaissance airplanes over them, and they would fly reconnaissance airplanes over us, and each side would count the missiles and the silos and the bomber wings, and each side would know exactly what megatonnage the other side could launch in case of a nuclear war, and it would keep us from basically killing the Earth. That was Eisenhower's proposal to Khrushchev, called his Open Skies, and Khrushchev turned him down flat. And there was some stuff about Gary Powers in there and U-2s and a
Yeah.
huge amount of, geopolitical bad news at that time that kind of made this a doomed proposal. So, and in that window, the CIA come up to the president, Mr. Eisenhower, and he said to him, Mr. President, they may not let our airplanes fly over, but what if we put cameras in a satellite? And we take pictures, and then we bring the film home, and we know what they're doing that way. And Eisenhower greenlighted something which would ultimately be incredibly successful, would probably have kept the Earth, human beings, from killing each other and the Earth with a third world nuclear war, and was used covertly by the CIA to take astonishing reconnaissance images of the moon, confirming the existence of the lunar domes that I've been talking about just as John Kennedy was taking office, and I am convinced that it was showing him that data that convinced him to go toe-to-toe with the Russians to get to the moon ahead of them with Project Apollo and to bring home what was waiting for humankind on the moon.
You might be right. You might be. What was it about the moon that you saw in the beginning that got you into this?
Well, as one of those twists of history would have it, my father, who was a big proponent of my research before he obviously died many years ago, he gave me a book for my birthday by a guy named George Leonard. This was back when I was still working for Cronkite, and he just knew that I was intrigued with the moon, and he saw this book one day and he bought it and he sent it to me excuse me, for my birthday, and it was by George Leonard, and it was called Somebody Else is on the Moon.
And Richard, we were talking about how you first entered the lunar end after being with Mars so much, but you were doing the moon thing almost at the same time, weren't you?
Well, there was a huge overlap, and of course there still is, because there's all kinds of stunning stuff on Mars, which my colleagues like Ron Gerbron and Andrew Curry and Robert Morningstar and Keith Morgan and Keith Laney and Bob, everybody is looking on the team and they see them, but they're so hard for laymen to see.
Right.
Because they're covered by all that damn dust and rust and, oxidation and dirt, and they're amid a whole bunch of rocks. The stuff on the moon, by contrast, is stunningly, obviously, brilliantly not supposed to be there when you look at these images from the South Koreans. They're running some kind of extraordinary deep state op or whatever, because what the South Koreans did when they launched last August, this 1,500-pound unmanned probe, they carried on board a special camera never taken by any mission, by any nation up to and including NASA and the Apollo program and the unmanned missions before and after to the moon. It's called a polarimetric camera.
Now, you sent us a picture of that camera that we've got.
Yeah, that's my item number, I think, 3 in the, item number 4 in the image section that Lex set up for me tonight. This is the actual page from the unmanned South Korean lunar spacecraft press kit translated into English, so you can see the capabilities of this amazing camera. Well, if you go to my first image, and you can tell folks how to get there because I'm having internet problems tonight. So
it's in the highlight reel at coasttocoastam.com. It's the first button. Just click that, and all of Richard's images pop up. The one I'm looking at is called Denuri Moon.
No, that's number 2.
That's number 2.
There's one above that.
It's like the ring of the top of the moon.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then there's a close-up on the right showing the moon much bigger and the horizon. You see that?
With a glow behind it. Yep.
Well, the full ring image is on the left, and the close-up is on the right. You see that, right?
Yep, I'm looking at it right now.
Okay. This is absolutely astonishing, impossible, should not exist. And the South Koreans, when they're asked what it means, they're not talking to anybody. One of my astronomy colleagues has been trying for days to get hold of the South Koreans, who are the principal scientists who are involved with this mission and this camera, and they will not answer an email.
Why'd they dump these pictures on us?
That's what's so stunning. It's like a soft disclosure. What they did, because they're working hand in glove with NASA, they set aside 33 pounds to include a special NASA shadow cam on this Korean mission to the moon, which is run by Mike Malin, who is the chief cover-up artist in NASA, both of the moon and of Mars. Anyway, it's all one very unhappy family.
What is this ring around the moon?
It shouldn't be there. You've looked at the moon a million times, I'm sure, with binoculars.
And I've never seen a ring.
You've never seen, because it doesn't exist with your naked eye. That is an image taken by a special camera, posted on the South Korean Space Agency website. That's why I posted the image in context. That's South Korean, there to the right of the image. And if I'd had time, if I'd had such problems with the internet here for the last few days, I would have sent links, the direct link to the South Korean website, which will have all those links up and running by the show we're going to do on all this coming Saturday night on the other side of midnight, beginning at 9 p.m. Pacific.
Are you baffled that they released all these photos?
No, it's part of disclosure. Remember, Brookings basically said the name of the game is to make people so bored with this that when we finally announce it, they'll go, oh, hell, I've known about that for years. And that's what they're doing. It's drip, 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 time-release aspirin, mixing our metaphors badly. So what they've done is, as they moved from Earth into moon orbit between August and December of last year, because they took a very low-energy trajectory, which is really cool, and it took them a long time to go between Earth and Moon on a very bizarre trajectory, and they kept taking long-distance pictures of the Moon through this special polarizing camera, which basically eliminates all the background unpolarized light and makes the glass domes all over the Moon stand out like the damn proverbial sore thumb. And it's obviously part of a strategy to do this, leak over weeks and months, and then at some point they'll announce what it is they've been photographing, and it will either be just before the first NASA astronauts in the Artemis program get to the moon, which will be toward the end of 2024, or when Elon Musk's private space program of 9 artists take a Starship, courtesy of Musk and their Japanese benefactor, into lunar orbit for 3 days in the same time frame toward the end of 2024, and they report back to Earth via Twitter and Instagram and TikTok and God knows what else, what they're seeing by simply looking at the moon through this special polarizing filter technology.
What is your theory, Richard, on how and where these lunar ruins got there?
Oh, my God, George, this changes everything. Remember that old TV commercial with the rice pudding, or was it the chicken soup? And some kid looks at the camera and he says, Mikey likes it?
Yep. Hey, well, Mikey, he loves it.
And this changes everything. Well, this changes everything because, and this is probably one of the reasons why we've had such problems outside the community getting anybody to take a look at this, because the scale is so absolutely unbelievable Arthur C. Clarke, Stanley Kubrick compatible. I mean, we're looking at a technology that through means that we can imagine but certainly can't duplicate for, hundreds of years, a technology to basically put a series of glass domes all over the entire moon, englobe the entire moon to a depth of tens of miles. And we're now looking at the eroded remains in the only way that it really is visible, which is what's called polarized light. Light comes in two forms. It changes color when you change frequency, and it changes visibility when you change what's called polarization. And you can create literally lenses which will filter out the background noise and allow you, like the South Koreans have obviously done to look at the damn remnants of the dome around the whole moon.
Can we at home confirm any of this?
Yes. Let's go through some more images, okay?
All right.
Number 2 is a comparison of what I call the Denuri moon, which is the image on the left in my second item, with the normal full moon lit by white light and photographed from Earth orbit by a satellite that was actually put up in orbit to look at Earth resources. And one night they turned it on the moon and posted the image.
Why is the Korean image so sharp?
Because it's taken at a different wavelength and polarization than the one on the right. They're roughly comparable, but there are differences in details. Not the least of which, do you see on the image on the right that kind of bright spot toward the middle of the moon?
Yep.
You see it, right?
Yep.
It's to the left of the center in the right-hand image.
Yeah, it's a small area.
It's a small area, but it's bright.
Yeah.
Okay, if you look at the image on the left, that spot has moved to the center of the image. That's because the Denuri spacecraft that took the image on the left is at a different angle from the moon, going between Earth and moon, than the image taken from low Earth orbit on the right by the Akanos spacecraft back in the 2000s.
And folks, if you have the capability of getting on our website, coasttocoastam.com, right under Richard's name, you click the images and they all pop up for you. Go ahead.
And
Richard.
these will all be available again on Saturday night on the other side of midnight, as well as 3 hours of our discussion and analysis and conversation. What's astonishing is we shouldn't be seeing anything like this. If you now look down at image number 3, this is what the Chinese have done. Remember, the Chinese want to own the moon. If you look carefully at the details between the left-hand image, which is South Korean, and the right-hand image, which is Chinese Space Agency art, you'll notice that the Chinese took the same image and accentuated with some art, blocking the dome, and then put their red stars and their yellow stars and their spacecraft that's going to send astronauts someday to the moon to open up a Chinese lunar base. And they're telling us in this foreshadowing art, this is why they're going, because they know what is there.
Fascinating. And when did this picture come out?
The South Korean image?
Yeah, the image.
Last September. And what they're doing is they're posting a series, including color images, because this polarimetric camera, which is my item number 5, can take, color picture. I'm sorry, item number 4 can take color pictures, so you can have color polarized images. And they've been posting those, and they're simply blending them into the background. There's no discussion, there's no explanation, there's no captions. They're simply posting the data without comment so that the audience can figure it out, and they have precedence for publishing officially this kind of data first.
You should write a new book on this one.
Well, I'm going to. In fact, I'm in the middle of it. I've been assembling all the texts, all the transcripts from all the shows we've done, all our previous work in the form of articles and papers and all that. And I'm in the negotiating process with 2 publishers at the moment, and I'm hoping that the guy with more money wins. Well, because we need the funds to take this now to the next step. Because once you've got the goods, once you've got the data, remember, as what's her name, Stephanie Rule says on MSNBC, the truth only matters if people hear it.
That's true. You seem more excited about the Lunars than the Mars.
Well, because remember, in the public discussion regarding NASA and Moon Mars, they're always talking now Moon Mars, Moon Mars. It doesn't matter where we prove there are ancient extraterrestrial artifacts. Once you prove they're beyond the Earth, the whole solar system, up to and including Mars, suddenly becomes your target. So Mars will come along for the ride because now a government has given us official data confirming what's on the moon.
Do you think NASA is shaking its head with these photographs?
No, they're part of the whole game plan. Remember, if you go back to Brookings, it never said we will never tell the people what their tax money has bought, right?
Right.
It always said we will do it at the appropriate time.
When they're ready.
And now, I mean, everything is hitting the fan at once. Hell, we're going to, in a couple of days, indict a damn president. We've never done that before. We've got the biggest land war going on in Europe we've had since World War II. We've never done that before. And now we got a government leaking ancient, stunning, planet-wide structures on a satellite of Earth, and they've never done that before. These are extraordinary times, George, and you have a front row seat.
What does Denuri mean in Korean?
It's Korean. It's actually a fusion of two Korean words. It means, and it tells me that the Koreans have an incredible sense of humor. It means literally, enjoy moon.
Huh. Interesting.
How could you not enjoy a moon covered with ancient, incredibly sophisticated ET artifacts right next door?
Sure. Tell me more about this dome.
Well, I've been puzzling over this for years because every time I show people the evidence, the first thing they say is, oh, come on, Hoagland, that's impossible. Well, yeah, for us. But it's like we've been talking, George, how long have we been talking about aliens, not just on this show, but as a culture?
A long time.
Hundreds of years, right?
At least.
Hundreds. You've got, Lowell Canals. You've got Flying Saucers Adamski. You've got Nightcap. You've got Air Force. You've got White House. You've got Cover-Up. You've got, now a Pentagon office devoted to basically extraterrestrials. Come on. That's what all that secret acronyming means. They're looking at real folks from somewhere else. Well, my model has always been that they are not the first, that we have been visited and interfered with and mingled with and schooled and upbrought, that's a word from my grandmother, over thousands of years, maybe from the beginning of life on Earth. So when you look around the solar system and you find stunning physical evidence of gargantuan mega architecture, why would you be surprised? Given that all the mainstream scientists from Sagan on always said, if we ever meet E.T., they will not be on our level. They will likely be thousands, if not millions, of years ahead of us, right?
Way ahead.
Well, if you accept that as a proposition, then when you meet their first artifacts, not them, but the ruins, their remains, their junk, their buildings, what would you expect to find? Super advanced architecture.
What did they use the moon for, in your opinion?
I think to help create life on Earth, intelligent life. I think this is school. This quickly gets us from physics into metaphysics, which, of course, is why we're going to have Georgia Lambert, part of our conversation on Saturday night. I mean, George, this is so huge. This has never existed in the human ken of humans before, except thousands and thousands of years ago, and then it got forgotten and suppressed. And now
you got a cold? Are you sick?
No, I just got very dry southwestern New Mexico.
Allergies. Allergy time.
I think so, yeah. Let me take some water here.
Yeah, take a little sip there. Richard Hoagland with us. His new website is called The Other Side of Midnight, by the way, .com. And that's also the name of his program, The Other Side of Midnight. How many years have you been doing that, Richard?
Oh, you don't want to know. It's like 8, something like that.
Goes by fast. Well, Richard, there's a couple more images you sent us. Number 5, I believe, is the negative color eclipse. Tell us about that.
Well, these are the same moon in color on the left, which is a negative color image. And you know what happens when you make a negative of a color image, George? The blues go kind of reddish, and the reds go kind of bluish-greenish.
They flip-flop, yep.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
The image on the right is a black and white color, the Iconos image of the full moon. Look at them carefully. What do you notice about the image on the left?
There's a lot of color, blue color on the outside.
Yeah, forget the color. Look at the shadings as you go from the center of the moon, the center of the disk, toward the edge, in any direction.
The marks are really dark, and then the rest is all kind of light.
Yeah, and like at the edge, it gets lighter and lighter and lighter, and it gets greenish,er and greenish,er, right?
You're not telling me this is grass, are you?
Yes.
Are you really?
That is a negative color image of Earthshine on the eclipsed moon during a total solar eclipse in 2017.
Trees on the moon?
Not tree. No. Remember, the color is like false color. When you take a normal color image and you flip it in reverse, you make a negative of everything.
Right.
The colors don't correspond to real colors anymore. They're just to show you light and shadow and where to look for geometry, for detail. The moon, if it's airless, like the object on the right, the detail should be sharp right up to the edge, right?
That's right.
Instead, one on the left, it gets very fuzzy. In fact, you can see banding. There are 5 concentric bands of light and dark in that kind of very soft greenish color at the edge. That's the domes. That's the layers of the domes that have been scoured down to the ground on the Earth side and are pretty much preserved on the far side. And because of a unique situation in the solar system that the Earth reflects from its oceans polarized light, what the Earth becomes during a total solar eclipse is a huge 8,000-mile wide natural solar polarizing filter. So it's bouncing polarized light off the moon. The moon's glass is reflecting polarized light, which amplifies it enormously. So this photo, the one on the left in this number 5, it's simply a negative of a normal eclipse image processed by a very sophisticated computer program to pick up something I tried to pick up when I was at CBS back in 1970, which is to photograph Earthshine on the moon during a total solar eclipse. And now, when you can do it with technology that includes CCD cameras and computer algorithms, bingo, the polarized light of the domes reflecting the polarized light of the Earth makes it totally stand out, totally independent from the South Korean lunar mission with their polarizing camera.
And then, of course, the 6th image has to do with the lunar eclipses, right?
Well, back in 2017, we had an eclipse which went from sea to shining sea. It went from the west coast almost to the east coast. Well, 2024, there's another eclipse in a little different geometry, but it's going to cross going from Mexico up across North America and into Canada, crossing the center of the United States all the way to the East Coast. If you're in that eclipse path in 2024 and you have a smartphone with a polarizing filter and something to magnify the image of the moon, like a pair of binoculars or a telescope or whatever, you'll be able to take from your backyard during that eclipse path of totality, the 3 or 4 minutes of totality, you'll be able to take your own pictures of the domes covering the moon, and we'll provide people with experts they can send the images to be computer processed, and we will have thousands of independent coast and other listeners verifying the existence of these polarized images of the ancient lunar domes.
We're going to have you accumulate all of them.
Well, yeah, that's what websites do. And then we'll process them. We'll put them back out there. We will have some help from a colleague of ours in Czechoslovakia who's providing his expertise and website to do all this. And it's gonna make history, because at the same time this is going on, which is next spring, like a year from now, next April, is the 2024 eclipse. A few months later, the NASA astronauts in the Artemis program, they go into lunar orbit, and then at the same time frame, you've got what's his name, Musk, and his tourists, his artists who we are in touch with, and we are giving tutorials of how to take photographs close up from close lunar orbit of these damn domes in, now we know, polarized light. That's what makes them show up, as you can see on the South Korean images.
What was in the domes at some time?
Well, all right, the surface of the moon is like 15 million square miles, all right?
Mm-hmm.
If you wanted to create an artificial environment, which if civilization broke down and forgot how to replenish the atmosphere, because the atmosphere, if you tried to put an artificial atmosphere around the moon by some technique that would basically use gravity to concentrate oxygen and nitrogen, given the gravity field of the moon, that atmosphere would leak away in about 2,000 years.
Exactly. Dissipate.
Which means it would have to be continually replaced in order to keep people alive on the moon without high technology. If you build a dome, if you are super advanced, incredibly energy-rich civilization that can use materials and hyperspace to basically bring all the energy you need out of the vacuum, so-called, quantum energy or hyperdimensional energy, then you are able to use the materials of the moon to create a set of shields around the whole moon. Then as long as there is not significant leakage, which can be measured in millions of years, the atmosphere around the moon will last essentially as long as the dome, which is millions of years.
Who was living in there?
Exactly. We do not know. But we do know now where to go to get the answers. Because if you have any advanced civilization, even some of the more advanced civilizations in our own human past, what's the first thing anthropologists and archaeologists try to find when they encounter a new culture, a new set of ruins, a new buried civilization? What do they try to find?
Artifacts.
And the libraries.
If there are any.
Well, you can't have civilization without libraries, because no human can remember stuff that they're not taught. And in order to go from generation to generation to generation, there has to be a repository to collect and store and provide that information to future members of the civilization.
But you're also saying that the far side, they're intact still?
No, they're much better shape, but they're not intact. And the reason we know that is we have amazing images of the ruins on the far side of the moon, the dome in much better condition from the Chinese.
That's right.
And we'll be showing those on Saturday night.
Perfect. Let's go to some
photos. midnight.com.
Jeff in Ferguson, Missouri, get us started here. Jeffrey, go ahead.
Hey, thanks, George. Richard C. Hoagland, been a real fan since I've heard you on with Art Bell.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm that old.
Oh, I know that Art and Robin are somewhere probably having a drink together, smiling.
Yeah. Actually, I got a question. Maybe you can answer it. Did NASA ever have design concepts for a lunar lander for the space shuttle?
It's so funny you should bring that up, because I was sitting in Houston waiting for a NASA press conference one afternoon, and I happened to look over and I noticed the guy I was sitting next to was a brilliant engineer called Max Faget, who was the engineer who designed the space shuttle.
Wow.
And there he was sitting right next to me in the dark. So I said, Dr. Faget, I've got a question. If you could load her up with fuel, refuel in low Earth orbit, could the shuttle go to the moon and could it land? And he looked at me like I was nuts. And he said, well, yes, but it would require a lot of money. So you got it from Max Faget himself.
Next up, thanks, Jeff. Brendan in Austin, Texas. Hey, Brendan, go ahead.
Hey, thank you so much, George and Richard. We got Georgie and we got Hoagie. Yeah, sorry, I had to. But he's right, George. You and all of us have a front row seat to disclosure, and it's going to be a crazy couple years. So let's all just sit back and enjoy it. But I have two questions.
It's going to be gangbusters. No one. Look, we've all lived through this negative nonsense over the last several years. Wait till you see what's coming and the incredible positive effect it's going to have on humans.
It's going to be incredible. I'm so excited. And thank you so much, both of you guys, for your work throughout all this time. So
Thank
super
you.
quick, I saw some structures on the moon from 2010 from the Moon Reconnaissance Orbiter.
Right.
And
MRO.
the polarized light part was very, very interesting. But what I saw on the pictures wasn't domes, but I saw mosaic processing and fogging, like blurring, that they put over it.
Well, they've been
but
trying
I
to
did see
obscure
towers.
this for. They've been
and
trying to
pipes.
obscure this for decades.
Yes,
They
and I
misfiled
saw
pictures.
tracks. And the tracks, I think, are very important. I saw tank tracks and, like, tire tracks, like rubber tracks. I think the tracks mean that it was us, because why would these civilizations that built all of this need tracks? I think that we went there in, like, the 60s or the 70s. We brought up a ton of equipment. What did you think about that, and why were the photos censored, and how did they get uploaded to NASA? Is there any way I could talk to you privately? Could I email Cynthia, your producer, or anything?
Talk to Cynthia, okay? But I've got to, kind of refute what you just said, because there's no way that the Apollo technology created a set of tiered lunar-wide domes covering 15 million square miles and towering 50 miles above the lunar surface. There's no way. And the fact that NASA's been doing everything to hide these images and their veracity from all the Apollo missions and all the unmanned missions and all the decades of lunar photography that I've been looking at now for decades, there is no possible way that we did this or this is being faked. This is real. This is going to change everything. And George's, audience tonight is getting in on the ground floor how you can participate in being part of history to help confirm this for the world. And all you have to do is listen for free on Saturday night on The Other Side of Midnight.
How do they find you, Richard?
TheOtherSideOfMidnight.com.
Simple as that, okay?
Simple as that. And we're also on terrestrial radio in Southern California, but that broadcast is delayed. So the best way is we're in 193 nations all over the world, and obviously the South Koreans have been listening.
Absolutely. Joe, Long Island, New York. Joe, go for it, Joseph.
Yeah, hi, Richard. I just want to ask you, I know in the news update today they were talking about the Magellan probe approaching Mercury, which has a surface temperature that goes as high as 900 degrees Fahrenheit. So just ask you about the probes in our solar system and their inability to get, too close to a planetary surface and what that means and does not mean. And also, how does plasma affect a craft going, say, to the moon, the plasma in space?
Well, there's no physical problems in encountering any of the objects in the solar system unless they have atmospheres and you get too close and you wind up crashing, like one of NASA's unmanned Mars probes did years ago, ostensibly because of a conversion error between imperial units and metric units. In terms of physical barriers, there's only the atmospheres. What's so amazing about this discovery is that we now know, courtesy of the South Koreans, that if you put the right camera on your mission, you can see the damn domes that have been there since the beginning of the space program, obviously much, much, much longer. But NASA's either pretended not to know they're there, recorded them in other wavelengths, had no idea what they represented, therefore deliberately ignored them, or had been running a two-tier cover-up where they post certain images for the in-crowd, keep everything else secret, and now the idea, because of plausible deniability, I would imagine, is if you have the South Koreans ultimately hold the press conference, NASA can't be accused of covering it up because they'll just say, we never saw them. We were using the wrong film, the wrong cameras, the wrong filters. In other words, plausible political deniability.
Do you think the South Koreans released these photos with NASA's blessing?
Absolutely. It's one big unhappy family, George. I don't think there are any independent space programs because the biggest secret they've all been keeping for the last 50 years has been that we're not alone. Look at all the images we've got of ruins on Mars and now ruins on the moon. And there's also Brookings, which basically said, we're not going to tell them now, but we're going to tell them when the time is appropriate after they've had sufficient background through the media. And that's what Brookings recommended in much more legal language, and that's what we've been subjected to for the last half century. Now is the time when we're all going to get pregnant, and it's obviously the South Koreans who are being chosen as the leading, least offensive messenger to show us the stunning future we all can have.
How many lunar astronauts are still alive? Just Buzz? Are there any more, do you know?
Well, there's, I think there's Charlie Duke. I think there's Buzz Aldrin. I don't know. I think Schmidt may be still with us. The astronaut who was the geologist.
Mm-hmm.
Gene Cernan died, Apollo 17. It's funny you should bring up the astronauts, because the one astronaut who we now know was telling us the truth for all those years that he was selling his paintings, Alan Bean. Alan Bean. So when we come back after the break at the bottom of the hour, remind me to talk in detail about how Alan Bean foreshadowed all of what we've now confirmed and how you can get in on the ground floor to help promote Alan Bean's paintings of ancient structures on the moon.
Richard, tell folks about your Saturday event.
TheOtherSideOfMidnight.com from 9 to midnight, West Coast time, and East Coast, of course, it's after midnight, the other side of midnight. TheOtherSideOfMidnight.com, we're going to have 3 hours of data, discussion, controversy, some, heated discussion, and a plan of how you now can help the world make the transformation.
Excellent. And how's everything with you? How's your health these days?
My health is fine. I miss Robin terribly. It's 4 years and 17 days tonight.
Oh, my God. Tonight.
Yeah.
I miss her, too. She was one heck of a lady.
Do you know the last physical gift she gave me?
What was that?
It was a plaque, and I went looking for it because it was a Christmas gift before everything went to hell. It says, "Love you to the moon."
How about that? Since 1969 to 1972, 12 men have walked on the moon during our moon landings. 4 are still alive today. They are Buzz Aldrin, Apollo 11, David Scott, Apollo 15, Charles Duke, Apollo 16, Harrison Schmitt, Apollo 17. Alan Bean, Richard, passed away in 2018.
Yeah. He was the Lunar Command pilot on Apollo 12 with Pete Conrad, who was the mission commander. Even decades earlier than when he was picked to go to the moon, Alan Bean went to Naval Flight School, and he was really interested in art, fine art.
Like as a painter?
Yeah, as a painter, yes. He did hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of paintings when he got back from the moon, using all his skills that he developed over decades before he went to the moon. My feeling now, based on what we know, is that he was handpicked to be the artist, because remember, my model, George, is that the Apollo astronauts had their brains altered when they came back. That was what the quarantine period was all about, to make them forget everything they'd really seen and kind of conform to a fake script. Well, how do you get around a fake script? What if you send an astronaut who is not left-brained, but is basically right-brained, an artist, a painter, a creative? For some reason, around 1991, when we held the first press conference of the National Press Club, devoted, it was 95, to what I'd found on the moon. Very shortly after then, Alan Bean began painting a very different moon, which has all the colors, all of the incredible detail that NASA's not shown us, but depicted as an art form as opposed to reality.
You think these were things he saw?
I think there were things he saw. Whether his right brain artist, mind could avoid the brainwashing and basically commit it to canvas unconsciously, or whether he at some point reconnected with the two realities and realized he'd been fed a script, and all the other guys too. But when you look at his body of paintings, there's a stunning panoply of the real moon that you would see in photograph if the moon was covered with tens of miles of glass, even in incredibly vanished form on the near side where we landed, where you could get down through the glass because it's basically almost now non-existent. And his work, his paintings, which we posted on many shows, over the last several months after during and after the Artemis mission, and we're going to do again next Saturday night, show Bean's paintings depicting exactly what the Chinese and NASA and other space agencies have photographed, but they've never announced it. And we live in a culture, George, where unless officials say, this is the reality you're experiencing, millions of people won't get it.
That's right.
They can look right at the images, at the evidence, and they won't have
see
any
it.
clue as to what they're looking at.
They need someone like you to point it out. Let's go to a wild card, Ed in Charlotte, North Carolina. Hey, Eddie.
Hey, George. Thanks for taking the call.
Sure.
I got a couple of questions on the moon, Mr. Hoagland, but also you mentioned about being visited. There was an extraordinary interview by George Knapp last night with a gentleman who had no interest whatsoever in UFOs at all. And what makes it incredibly valid is Knapp knows several government officials that went and visited with the family, and they reached a certain agreement. And Knapp has known these two gentlemen from the government for over 2 decades, and said they're both excellent quality people. So it's a very interesting interview.
He trusts them.
Yes, and so on the moon, my theory is that there's no way some planet hit and threw a ball up there that is perfectly distanced for a perfect eclipse at the position exactly far enough from Earth.
Exactly. All the numbers fit, and because they were designed to.
Yeah. Well, I've got a couple of questions about this. One, I've made some discoveries of how the moon affects mass psychology of humans. The Air Force in the 60s found that earthworms at a certain location near Denver, for example, in the forenight of the new moon would curve to the left, and of the other forenight curve to the right. In other words, the high tide. There's little fish or something in the ocean, and their little old brains or something are affected by the moon, and they can determine exactly the highest tide in the spring to go up and lay their eggs, so that no net tide will come up and wipe them out.
Yeah, I think you're talking about the grunion.
Yeah, I'm just saying there's I mean, supposedly I'm not a gynecologist, but women have cycles that apparently mirror the moon. I mean, we wouldn't be alive without the moon.
All kinds of documentable connection between life on Earth and the moon. And all I'm saying is, given the scale of the technology we're seeing in these images, the folks who did it deliberately, because this is supposed to be a nursery. And something went radically wrong. We're not going to find out what and how to fix it until we find the damn libraries.
What's your other question, Eddie?
Well, I was just going to say that I also have proven that certain, like an eclipse, as it moved closest to a city, say like New York in 87, there was an annular eclipse, and my friend verified that to the very minute and second it went by there, a trend changed that had been in effect for decades, and I've got several of these that can't be random, because it's the very second that eclipse comes the closest to that place and affects humanity. So the moon has an incredible impact on our lives. One last thing I will say, Sybil Leek, speaking of astronauts, she was Book of the Month Club in the 50s, which surprised me as a white witch back then. They let her in. And she's quite an astrologer, and she loved space and moved down there to where our space center is from England. And she determined that 92% of our astronauts all have the moon in the same house, no matter what month they were born. In other words, it doesn't matter whether you're, Cancer or Leo or something. What matters is where is the moon, whatever month you're born. That 90-some% are influenced to become astronauts based on the moon being in the same position, whatever month they're born.
That's an interesting take.
That's
there.
very interesting.
You're into astrology. That's perfect.
Well, it's hyperdimensional astrology. It's all part of this hidden physics we're not supposed to know exists.
Let's go to Mike in Denver. Michael, go ahead.
George, good morning. Thank you so much for taking my call.
Sure thing.
And Richard Hoagland, first of all, I want to tell you it is such an honor to speak with you. And thank you so much for your innovative approach to space. It means a lot. And I just had a quick comment and question. So something really interesting NASA currently is funding is the design of a lunar solar wind extraction system to extract helium-3 from the moon. And what's really significant about this is if it's used as a fuel in a nuclear fusion reactor, it could actually become like a significant lunar export for power generation around the world. And, it leads me to some of my questions. Bill Nelson, astronaut, has raised concerns around China trying to claim the moon. He said that they could try to monopolize these resources if China was to get to the moon first and claim it. So my questions would be, how important do you see the potential of what NASA is trying to do with this sort of energy extraction, and what concerns do you see around China possibly trying to monopolize it?
Well, the NASA efforts are, of course, based on mainstream physics and technology. It's very incremental because the real secret of the, ancient ruins on the moon is they didn't use fusion or they didn't use solar. They used hyperdimensional physics and torsion field energy, and you can, ultimately put that in a box and sell it at Kmart and change the Earth forever. So that's one of the huge benefits of going to the moon and finding the libraries. You'll find, engineering diagrams, you'll find technology, you'll find laboratories, you'll find all kinds of evidence of an incredible technology which we can duplicate because, laws of physics are the laws of physics. What one culture can figure out, any other culture can ultimately figure out. The danger of letting the Chinese have free access without competition is that they will then sequester all these discoveries for themselves and obviously not share with the world. So this has got to be a unified human effort to walk in the front door together, which is what we're going to talk about Saturday night, how we get the Chinese to play on the same equal playing field that we are.
Good luck.
Well, there are ways we can force the issue, George, and that's why we need another 3 hours.
But how can China claim the moon is theirs when we've been there way before they were?
Well, remember, it doesn't matter what the truth is anymore. It's just making the absurd claim and making it loudly again and again and again. The real problem with the Chinese trying to own the moon is physically they can't do it. Our space program is much more developed. The Musk route is going to be the breakthrough. You're going to have hordes of tourists from all over Earth visiting the moon, a la Elon Musk. You're going to have the NASA Artemis program with this moon base at the South Pole, where the ruins are in much better preserved condition than they are at the equator where Apollo landed. So it's only going to be a matter of time before the world knows what's there, and, fat chance for the Chinese in trying to own or monopolize any of it.
Let's go to Linda in Spokane, Washington. Welcome to the show. Hi, Linda.
Again and again.
Linda?
The real problem with the Chinese trying...
Oh, you're not going to make it, Linda. Sorry. Joe in the Bronx, take it away. Go ahead, Joseph.
Hey, George, how are you?
Great.
Good. Richard, I wanted to ask you how you feel about those rumors that we were warned off the moon, and if that's what created the gap in between us visiting the moon, and now they plan to go back. And also...
Okay, hang on. Let me stop you there since we don't have a lot of time. I think that's a cover story, which basically, this is on a clock. You can't do this disclosure without it being on a clock. In the 1970s, when Apollo ended in 72, it wasn't time. In 2023, 2024, it's time. And I think all the timelines were carefully built toward this time because now it's time.
What else did you have, Joe?
I wanted to know if we have any evidence of extraterrestrial life on the moon, anything at all that we may have brought back with us in addition to the moon rock.
Well, we don't, unless you want to look at the Surveyor 3 television camera, and you can look it up on the Internet. The more interesting evidence of previous life on the moon is from the Soviet unmanned robotic return missions of lunar soil and rocks. And several of those missions, those lunar missions, found evidence in the soil of very complicated, sophisticated organisms that the mainstream science has not admitted because, A, it came from Russia.
Richard, since you've been doing this, and you've been doing it a long time, what have you found to be the most fascinating aspect of all this?
Well, the idea that right next door we've had this damn dome, and we've been looking through it because we have had the wrong optics, meaning not the right filtering. And once it's verified, both by humans, NASA astronauts and, Musk's tourists, and a hell of a lot more people, it opens up the whole solar system to the idea that I've been proposing for a very long time. We are part of some grand effort to bring forth consciousness in the cosmos. And current life on Earth was not what was intended. Something got radically broken, and only by getting in touch with this enormous reality can we have ever a hope in God's name to fix it.
Minute left, Richard. Tell folks about what they can expect on Saturday with you.
Well, Saturday, this kind of came out because of the whole Chinese balloon thing. What if the Chinese know everything that we've talked about tonight and then some, and are quietly planning to basically move in and utilize this extraordinary technology and science that's there by pretending to the rest of the world that it's not there? So we have to undercut that. We have to confront that. We have to open the doors. And fortunately, we've got two ways of doing this. One is citizens. Everyone who's interested, come to the other side of midnight and begin to follow the story, and you'll hear how you can participate. And the other is, of course, the total solar eclipse next spring, about a year from now, when anybody with a smartphone and a few instructions from the website will be able to prove to their own satisfaction these damn domes exist and all that implies.
Richard, my friend, thank you for being on the program.
The Coast mobile app is now available for download on iPhones and Android devices. You can become an insider directly through this app. This is a great option for our international listeners, and new users will also receive a free 2-week trial.